in Wisconsin.
You see, what's happening is as soon as they saw that Trump was taking the lead in many states, the numbers stopped updating. It looks almost like there was a deliberate attempt to stop it so that the Democrats could find more mail-in ballots to stuff. But so Trump's going to fight him at the Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so let's see the Halil Gemara. Tanu Rabban, Gimel Dvarim Hitter, Rab Chananya, and Nakavya La Anshe Tveria. There are three things that Chananya made a heter only for the Anshe Tveria. The first item was Mamalin Mayim Migezustera B'Shabbos, and that was the sugya that was relevant to our Gemara. He allowed them to use this origami. He allowed them to take a big plank, cut a 4x4 tvachim hole in it, and then make believe that all the four sides were folded down. That was a kula. It was only for Tveria, as we learned in the Gemara, because Tveria, the Yam Kinneret, is anyway surrounded by walls. It's less chomer than a regular body of water, so he would only allow this to be done in the Kinneret, not in any other body of water. And Chaim Tzvi said it's a pretty good idea because only the Kinneret has fresh water. If he did it by the Red Sea anyway, it would be salt water. Zog to Gemara, v'toimnim ba'atza. Good morning, Shmuel. V'toimnim ba'atza. You're allowed to, if you want to bury your Paris, in atza, which is psilus kidneys, which is the psilus left over from beans. If you wanted to bury your Paris in it, I guess to protect them, you'd be allowed to do that. Now, what is the problem of burying it in atza? Atza, if you cut it down, if you harvest it early in the morning, it's still going to be moist from dew. Dew is one of the shiva mashkim that if it comes in contact with Paris and you approve of it, you wanted that dew, then those Paris will now be huchsher l'kabel toma, and then from here on in, if they come in contact with the davar tamei, these fruit will become tamei. So he said you could be tamei ba'atza, even if this atza is wet and it has dew on it. And therefore, when you put your pears into this atza, it's going to make the pears wet. The pears will still not be hochshir l'kabel toma. And there's a very good reason for it. What is the specifics of the halacha? The Tanya, hishkim lahavi psilus. What happens if someone got up very early in the morning when the dew is still wet on this atza? Now, why did they get up so early to gather this atza when there was still dew on it? If he especially got up early because he wanted that wetness, he wanted that moisture. So it's something that he wants to have. And then he buries the pears in it, so he wants those pears to become wet. That's considered that the pears were wetted with his will, and therefore the pears are going to be makabel toma. But what a concept. If a person got up early because he has a job, then his pears stay tar. So you see there's a special kedusha v'tahira if someone gets up early because he has to go to work. Someone who gets up early because he has to go to work, there's a kedusha in there. Because you see, if a guy got up early and he only cut the atza down early, not because he wanted to be wet, because he had to do it early in the morning, there's still moisture out there. It will not consider b'chiyuta, therefore the pears will not be makabel toma. And people of Tveria, because this was only a heter that Reb Chananya offered to the people of Tveria. Anshe Tveria k'mi shelo yivatam b'malachadami. People in Tveria were bali malacha; they were hardworking people. So he said, "You b'nei Tveria, since you're hardworking people, I know that you woke up early, not because you wanted the utz to be wet, but you have to get up early to do your things because you have to get off to work. And therefore, if you hid your pears, if you buried your pears in this utz to protect them, they will not become tummy." Zok to Gemara weiter. And the third halacha that Chananya offered the people of Tveria to be mekel was a mistapkin baloitis. If you took a shower on Shabbos, we don't fear to be able to take a bath on Shabbos or Yom Tov. But in those days, Rashi says, if you bathe in cold water, which they were matter then mistabik baluntis, you're allowed to dry yourself off with a towel. Then and we're not concerned that you're going to squeeze the towel, you're going to squeeze the moisture out of the towel. Where did he say this? The Tanya. Mistabik Adam baluntis, one may dry himself off with a towel. Now, in the mikveh there, I guess the mikveh provided towels. Don't put it in the garbage tub that was set up there to put all your towels. Rather, leave it on the counter, leave it on the shelf. Why? Don't give it to the mikveh attendant. Don't put it where the mikveh attendant is going to take it. You know why? Because they're choshed to do schita. And if you give it to him, he's going to do schita with it. So better just put it in your locker and you'll deal with it after Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon says even more, you're allowed to carry it to your home. And Rashi says, we're not going to be concerned that you're carrying it. You're not focusing, you're schmoozing with the guy who near you, and you might, by mistake, squeeze it out. We're not choshed for that. So these are the three halachas that Reb Chananya was making for Anshe Tveria. Now it seems like this Mistapik and Baluntas wasn't a special heter for the people of Tveria. It's mashma that even if you weren't a member, you still have access to the heter. But the heter of being able to bury your parents in this otzah and assume that it's not tamei, that's only for Tveria because people were working people and they got up early to work. The reason why they got up early was not because they wanted the moisture on this otzah. And of course, the first kula is definitely only for Tveria because we said that the Kinneret had special features in that it was surrounded by some types of barriers all the way around, and therefore Chananya had a special kula for that area.
It wasn't only Nakel for Anshe Tveria. I mean, he doesn't give a reason why, but the Brisa says
it was for the Anshe Tveria.
Right.
Because those were the people who asked him the Shaila. He was probably the Rav in Tveria, so they asked him the Shaila, so he answered. But two of the three are kulas that would only be relevant for the people of Tveria. Amar Rabbi Barafuna, Loi Shanu. So Chananya had a very special heter that you could take this big piece of plywood that's 24 tvachim by 24 tvachim. You can take a jigsaw and cut a hole out in the center of it that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, and then you're allowed to draw water up to your balcony from that hole. Amar Rabbi Barafuna, Loi Shanu that we allow you to draw water up if you need drinking water. If you have dirty water to get rid of and you want to dump it down into the river or into the water, also that'll be usher. Why would it be usher? So Rashi tells us why. Because to pour dirty water out through that hole down into the water, usher, because as soon as the water hits the bottom, it's going to move around and it's going to leave. So you're causing it to, you might be directly pouring it into the Rishus HaRabim, but indirectly you're causing it to flow out from the Rishus HaRabim into the Carmelis. Matzkav Lo Rav Shizbi. I don't understand. We're about to learn a Mishnah that says that if you want to pour water out in your yard and your yard isn't big enough to absorb all the water, there's a problem with the water being poured out in your yard because it's going to flow out into the Rishus HaRabim around you. And the Mishnah is, the Mishnah is going to tell us that you need to build like a cesspool or like a septic tank so that at least the water has a possibility of draining down into the cesspool rather than going directly out of the chutzner. So, frankly, I don't understand. In the case of the uka, you'd be allowed to pour water there, and you're allowed to pour water into this uka, even if we know you're overflowing the uka, even if you've already exceeded the capacity of the uka. And when you pour the water in, you know it's going to overflow and spill out, you're allowed to pour it there. So what's the difference between pouring water down the hole where you know it's going to spread out and pouring water on the floor of your property when you know the septic tank is overflowing and it's still going to flow right out of your property? So tomorrow the difference is as follows. Hanu taimi, v'hanu loy taimi. In the case of the uka, what you really want is you want for it to be absorbed in its place. And therefore you don't care if the water flows out or not, you would be just as happy if it stays in this place and seeps into your ground. So therefore, it's going to be usher, because we're hoping that's what's going to happen. But here, when you pour it, you know instantly when you pour it, it's leaving your property, and therefore it's going to be usher. Let's see Rashi inside. Rashi articulates it much better than I can.
I'm telling you, it means I don't care about the water that's overflowing away, therefore it's mutter.
Correct. But time, the
water
correct. But
into the river.
I know it's flowing.
I wanted to go as far away as possible.
Correct.
Water. Yeah,
correct. So let's see what Rashi says. Hamayim asuyim lachalosh ulihibola b'karka. It's eventually it's going to seep down and be absorbed into the karka. Therefore, ki shafech, when you're pouring it, adaita the livlu b'chayuk shafech. Your primary thought is that what's going to happen to it is that it's going to be absorbed in your ground. If it happens to overflow and flow outside, lav machshavtoi lahachiu. That's not his intent. His intent when he's pouring the water out on the floor is that it should be absorbed right there in its space and not leave his premises. And therefore, his intention that it should be absorbed into the ground right around him was not niskayim, and it ended up flowing over and out of his rishos. Vishori. Why is it mutter? Even if his intention was that it should flow out, there's no derice anyway. He poured it into Rishus Yachid. It went out. So even if it goes out, it's not really a deraisa. Therefore, since his intention is that it shouldn't go out, it's mutter l'chila. When he pours it, he knows for sure it's going to travel. So it's ratcheting a little differently than what Shlomi said. Raji saying
he also knows for sure he's going to travel. There's no more room left in the cesspool.
I'm hoping that it will. I'm hoping I poured it. Maybe I didn't flow. I'm pouring it that it should flow, that it should stay there. It flowed over. What should I do? Here, I know when I'm pouring it. There's no question about it. It's flowing right over.
This is probably the raya for the Taz. Sukkah. You know, this happens all the time when a person has his sukkah and he has the shlak, and the shlak is full of water, and you roll up the shlak or you push off the water. As long as by pushing off the water, it goes onto your deck, and only afterwards does it go onto the ground, right?
It won't be a problem. I hear.
Fine.
But
even though
that's worse, because there it's going to lead to a deraisa. Here, even if the water goes out of your it's just transferring from a Rosh Hashanah to a Carmelis. There, it's actually making zriya, because watering grass is under the heading. It's a told of zriya.
It's zriya.
This is
that's a bigger point.
This can't be the right.
Because this is only derabbanan. Here, worst case scenario, it's a derabbanan. Rashi says. There, worst case scenario, you actually have a deraisa.
Yeah, worst case, not in the case of the
Rashi, even if you. I'm sorry?
Not in the case of the Uka, it will be a Rosh Hashanah.
There's no Rosh Hashanah there at all. It's going from your house to the Carmelis outside. Or actually, the area around you would be Rosh Hashanah. But you're right. I'm pouring it into my Rosh Hashanah. It's going into Rosh Hashanah. You're right. What's the difference? What's the difference between going to Rosh Hashanah or causing Zereah? You're right. You're right. Very good. Yeah, you're right. That's Shlomi's right. Okay. Zogt Ehel Gemara Weiter. Zogt Ehel Gemara Weiter. There's another version of how this went down. But don't say that it's usher to pour out your spoiled water through that hole. It would even be mutter to pour out. Why not? The uka you're allowed to do it as well. So that will treat this just like the uka and will allow you to pour it out. And Rashi says, what's the difference? Like Shlomi said, he doesn't care that it should move away. He just wants it out of his rishos. He doesn't care that the water is going to wash it further away, and therefore it's going to be mutter. But if you had a chotzer that's less in area than 4 amas by 4 amas, nichele the lepik. Lebar, he wants it to leave his property. It shouldn't create mud in his chatzar. That's why you need an uka. So there you actually need it. What Rashi is trying to ask is, why do you need an uka at all then? If I'm pouring it on the floor and I want it to go out and I don't really care, so why do I need a nuka? If in our case I don't need any special nuka, I'm just dumping it into the water. The teretz is without a nuka, then we know for sure his das is that he wants it out of his rishus. With the uka, it's not. He's not worried about it dirtying his rishus because it's going into the cesspool. The next Gemara we've learned already because our Mishnah has been analyzed many times already in the earlier sugyas, so this should be very, very easy. We had two porches, one's above the other, and they're opposite. They're not directly one below the other. They're opposite from one another. And two people got together. And the question is, if the lower porch is going to be using the hole in the upper porch, it means that the lower porch, the people in the lower porch have rights to the upper porch. And if they don't make an Eruvin Chatzeres in between them, they're both going to be awesome. We only said this halacha if these two porches are a close lateral distance from one another, and we learned that means less than 4 tvachim. But if they were more than 4 tvachim separated horizontally, then the al yoinus muteris, in other words, the people on the lower porch are not considered that they're accessing the upper porch; they're considered severed. And what was the reason for it that we learned? If your only access to another rishus is through airspace, you can't walk there. You have to throw something there. That's not called connected, and therefore the lower porch, which is separated more than 4 tvachim horizontally from the upper porch, will not impact the upper porch, and therefore the people of the upper porch can use it using the height. Amar Rab Amar Pchia, or Rabbi Yosef Amar Boishia, Yesh Gezel b'Shabbos. This is a very cryptic statement. Yesh Gezel b'Shabbos, and v'churva machzer l'baylim. You're allowed to steal. So if there's a churva next door to you, Gezel works on Shabbos, meaning that you can make it yours and you can carry there. But the churva goes back to the baylim, which means you can't carry there. So it's like a cryptic statement. Yesh Gezel b'Shabbos would indicate that you could take over the churva that's next to your home, and then you would be able to carry there. And then the second half of the same statement is the churva machzer l'baylim. The churva goes back to the baylim, meaning it's somebody else's rishus, and they're not allowed to carry there. So it's a paradox we obey. Hal gufa kasha. Amar yesh gezel b'Shabbos al malkana. You see that you're kind of the churva that's next door to you, and then it says churva machzer l'baylim al malaykani, and therefore it would be usher for you to carry. So this is the shot in this cryptic statement. Yesh din gezel b'Shabbos. The halachas covered by the gzela apply, and therefore, ketzat, how would they manifest themselves? Ketzat the churva machzer l'baylim. A churva, if there's a churva next door to your house, we consider it a separate rishus. So Rashi says on the second wide line, yesh din gezel din hashavas gzela noyeg b'rishus al Shabbos. The responsibilities that gzela incur, that meaning you have to return things that you take on Shabbos, applies to these churvas. The churva machzer gzela l'baylim, and therefore v'aser lishtamish. Since it's your neighboring chaser, you would not be able to use it. So Rashi earlier tells us in the first one, "Mistam churva eina baylim mistamishim ba kol kach." Since a churva, if I have a churva next door to my house, the owner of the churva isn't really going to be using this churva. Therefore, the neighbor will have access to it, and he can use it. The nasis reshusai, and will look at it as if it became his reshus. And the maskana of the Gemara is that of course not. If the churva belongs to somebody next door to you, then of course you cannot carry into the separate rishus. Now, even though we learned earlier about the 3 churvas, and you have the one closest to you, there it's specifically speaking where the churva does not have an owner. But if the churva has an owner, then you have this issue, and there would be a carry. So, Omar. It says the chen shtei stories zula ma'ilmizu. V'i amrit yesh din gezel b'Shabbos. If there's a din gezel b'Shabbos, then amaya suris. Why should it be usher? I can't access my neighbor's porch. My neighbor's porch is separate from me. So sure, for me it will be usher, but for him it should be mutter. On my which we already know because we learned to sugi before, the upper level, that arrangement that they made there, that railing that they made, and the cutting that they did b'shutvis, the lower apartment and the upper apartment. So it is actually mine. It's not yet that I'm stealing. It's actually mine. I have a partnership in it. Why, if I'm a partner in your porch, even if I made my own opening, it should still be usher. Your porch should still be usher because your porch we both have access to because I chipped in with you. Right? I'm a financial partner with you in the arrangement you made on your porch. Just because I have my own private arrangement on my porch, that doesn't say that I don't have rights to your porch. And since I have rights to come to your porch on Shabbos, why don't you say that means that requires an Erev? If not, it'll be also.
It shouldn't require an Erev. I own it. I don't have to make it.
No, anytime two people own things b'shutvis, they need to make an Erev. Right? If we share ownership in a chutzner because we both have houses there, then I need an Erev. Right? So now that we're saying that I'm a partner in your porch, so now you and me, in order to be able to use your porch, we need to make an Erev between us. Otherwise, it will be also for both of us to access it. So the question is, why does it matter if I have my own access on my lower porch? Why is that relevant? The fact is, I happen to be a partner with you in your porch. So if I'm a partner with you in your porch, and both of us have access to use your porch to get water, it doesn't make a difference that I have another option. We have joint ownership there, it should require there. So tomorrow, no, there's a big difference. Even the if I make my own access downstairs by my porch, I'm revealing my intention. I might have a financial interest in your porch, but I made a clear decision I'm not going to be accessing your porch over Shabbos because I made my own access. And therefore, I sort of removed myself from use of your porch for Shabbos, and therefore no Erev is required because it's considered prepared for the exclusive use of the upper resident. Now we're going to learn about ukas. Chotzer shipchusim erabamis. So if you have a very big chotzer that's more than 4 amas, and of course this means 4 amas by 4 amas, which is 16 square amas, you can pour water on it, and we're not afraid that it's going to pour out to the Rosh Hashanah around because your property is big enough to absorb all of it. But if it's a small chotzer, if it's a chotzer shipchusim d'al amas, then ein shoyfchen b'soicha mayim b'Shabbos. Then you cannot pour water on the floor of your chotzer on Shabbos because we're afraid that it will drain out to the area around, and you're going to be mochi Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah. The only way we'll allow it is elim ken also la'uka machzekus asayim min hanekev ulamata. You need to make a cesspool. Basically, you have to have a pit in your chotzer, a drain pit that things will drain into, and out of that drain pit, we need, like every drain, you're not going to want to, even your drain pit, even your drain reservoir has to have a way of releasing what's inside it. It shouldn't overflow. So there would be a pipe that runs from your drain pit out to the Rosh Hashanah. That pipe would normally be sort of underground. It won't be above ground, which means it's somewhere in the height of your sump pit. So it's very similar to a sump pit where there'll be a pipe that connects to the side of the sump pit. You need to make sure that below the level of where the pipe connects, it can contain 2 saw. Because if it can't, then your sump pit is not really 2 saw, because once it gets the level of the pipe, it's automatically going to overflow and drain into the Rosh Hashanah. So you have
Just
to make sure.
Clear, yes. So these are drabbanans, aren't they?
Because you're not pouring it directly into the Rosh Hashanah.
The garama.
Right? So at most it'll be a derabban. That's correct.
Okay.
If you actually poured water directly into the Rosh Hashanah, that will be a deraisa. Here we're not even allowing you to pour water into your Rosh Hashanah, which is a Rosh Hashanah, because it's going to drain out, and that's a derabban. So if you have a sumpit that can contain sasayim below the overflow point, so then you'll be okay.
Do these pits have to be lined with anything? Like you can't water the ground, but if you dig a hole, you could water the ground. You could water the hole.
So your question is, how could you allow water to enter a pit? It's watering. Yeah, so there's probably nothing growing inside there. Plain earth.
Nothing growing, but just because there's nothing growing on the ground, you can't water the ground on Shabbos.
If you know that there's nothing growing there, why wouldn't you be able to water the ground? That's Harisha, you mean?
No, you're not allowed to water the ground on Shabbos.
No, you're not allowed to water because you're actually making something grow.
Right, so maybe something will grow.
Well, if there's nothing there, I guess then you don't have to worry about it.
What do you mean there's nothing there? There's nothing on the ground either.
Yeah, so it's very possible if you have a plain piece of earth and there's no seed in it at all,
Yeah, you're not.
I'm not so sure that you don't have to. Yeah, why wouldn't you be able to pour water on it? Unless it's harisha, unless because it prepares it, softens it. But so anything that prepares something for cultivating, for planting, will be usher. But in a pit, for sure, you're not preparing it for growth. So Zok the Gemara. So you have to have an uka machzeka sasaim min aneka v'lamata. Now this uka could be bein b'chutz. It could even be outside your property. Of course, directly adjacent to your property, but it could be right in your property, right near your property. What do you mean? If it's in Rosh Hashanah, so when the water goes into the uka, it's going into Rosh Hashanah. So Rashi explains it's a small area and it's considered a mokim p'tur. Because since it has depth to it, it's not flush with the ground, it's a hole. So therefore, it's considered a mokim p'tur, even if it's right outside your property. Or if it's inside your property, for sure it's a non-issue because then it's Rosh Hashanah. But there's one condition. If you want to use it, if you want to make the sukkah outside your property, and the reason why it's a mutter for the water to go into it is because it's a mokum tur, then you have to be careful that it remains a mokum tur. So therefore, you have to cover over the uka. Why? Because let's say these debris falls into the uka, and now it's less than 3 tefachim deep. Now it's no longer a mokum tur. If anything that's less than 3 tefachim deep is considered like the area around it. So if this uka that you made in Rishus HaRabim would be less than 3 tefachim deep, it's like Rishus HaRabim. And there you can't transfer your water from your Rishus HaYachid into Rishus HaRabim. So there you have to keep it covered to make sure that debris will not fall in it. What's
the purpose of having this water below the pipe? Not because of the halacha. Why would anybody want water sitting in a pool? Wouldn't we want all the water to leave?
Well, no, because the main purpose is that it should slowly settle into the ground. That's the idea. Which is really how a septic tank works, right? It slowly settles into the ground. But if it was inside your property, you don't have to cover this hole, because even if it gets filled with debris, it doesn't matter because it's still considered Rishus HaYachid. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says the following: Biv shokamer. What if I had a pipe in my rishus that leaves my rishus, and it's covered? After it leaves my rishus, it remains covered arba amish for 4 amish, and therefore the water won't spill out into the rishus rabim until it has already passed through 4 amish of this pipe. Now, 4 amish of this pipe is long enough; it's enough of a length that it would be able to absorb into the ground, meaning it's just as if it was a biv. So Rashi shall come with Meshach Arba Amos, Kimlon, we know, but Arba Amos Yeshir Livala Bahem Sasai Mayim. Shasam also Listapik B'Choyim. So Rashi gives us 2 important pieces of information. First of all, he says that if it's a 4 amma pipe long, that's just like a cesspool, because in 4 ammas there's enough land to absorb 2 saw of water. Now Rashi also reveals to us the reason why the Mishnah picks the share of 2 saw, because 2 saw is the amount of water that a normal family disposes of in a typical day. So it can handle the 2 saw that a person
How much is 2 saw of water in gallons?
So Ka'askalav Yigudu, a saw is Vav Kav, a Kav is Dalet Lug, a Lug is Vav Vim. So a saw is like 24, is like 6 and 4 is 24 times Vav, 24 times 6 is 144. It's 144 eggs.
144 eggs?
Yeah.
He's how many gallons?
144 eggs.
It's 144 eggs. I'm sorry?
Is an egg 5 ounces?
1/20 of a mikvah.
An egg.
1/20th.
Yeah, because you need 40 saw. It's 140. You need 40 saw for a mikvah. So it's a 40th of a mikvah.
Say 2 saw.
It's like 5
Yes,
gallons.
2 saw.
Right.
It's like 5 gallons, like a bucket.
Yeah. Okay, so Zok the Gemara, they were much more conservative with their water in those days, because every water they spilled out, they had to go schlep again. They didn't have plumbing. Okay, Zok the Gemara. So Biv, Let's go back to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, biv shall come arba amas b'shus rabim. If you have a pipe that's 4 amas long, and it goes from your area, from your into the Rishus Rabim, you're allowed to shoyfen l'soichem mayim b'Shabbos. You're allowed to pour water b'Shabbos because that acts just like a biv. Chomarim afilu gag oy chotzer mea amma. What if you had a roof or a chotzer that was very, very big, and there's a pipe from your chotzer, from your gag, even if it's 100 amas long, lo yishbach al pi abiv. You're not allowed to pour water directly into the pipe. You're not allowed to pour water directly into the pipe. Avol shoyvechul gag. You are allowed to pour water out on your roof, even though you know it's going to drain into that pipe. And the water will fall off your roof and drain onto the floor right where the pipe is. So even though your eaves will drain right into this pipe, you're still allowed to pour water on the roof. But you're not allowed to pour it directly into the pipe.
Why?
Rashi, the Gemara is going to be discussing it. The Gemara is discussing it, and Rashi tells us.
Obviously, it's above ground, below ground, and you have the arba amas.
So Rashi says the begufei kashafach, even the begufei kashafach, since you're pouring water directly into this pipe, makalchi lahedja uvekoyach l'shus harabim, it'll right away drain. Now, if you pour it on the ground and it slowly makes its way into your pipe and drains out, it won't come out with such force on the other end. But if you're pouring it directly into the pipe, it's going to come out with force on the other end. For Roya and someone walking by on the street who sees a flush of water coming out of your pipe, he'll assume that they're pouring it right there at the exit, and he'll assume that the homeowner wants to get rid of that water. Can we say the
fact that he does want to? Just the fact that he's pouring it directly into the pipe, he's showing Dash that he wants.
But there's not a problem because that pipe really would be long enough to absorb the water. Raj would be long enough to absorb the water. So I'm not there. It could absorb into the ground as it's going through.
Well, it's a perforated pipe
Well, this is not a pipe. It's really just a canal. It's more like a canal. There's actually a shaila if this would apply if this was a proper pipe. That would be worse. But we're talking about it's more like a canal that's or like a trench, a small trench collapsed out of the ground. The best way to visualize this is if you ever were a yeshiva bacher in Israel and you walk down Rechoiv Mea Sha'arim on the Erev Shabbos, the sponge is squirting out of everybody's porch. It's impossible that you were in Eretz Yisrael for any significant amount of time and didn't suffer from a sponge attack, right? You're walking home, and especially if you're all showered and ready for Shabbos and you went to learn early and you have somebody who's late in cleaning his apartment for Shabbos and you're walking down Rechoiv Mea Sha'arim to get somewhere, wherever you're going, and all of a sudden, you got someone's dirty porch water, and if it's a home, it's even the dirty porch is gefährlich. But if you walk by a Bacham apartment that they only sponge it once a week, then you're done. So that's what this biv is.
And they have the canal in the middle of the road.
That's right. They just roll. All the roads have that biv. That's right. Okay. So zok the helig the more weiter. So v'chomarim afilu gag echotzer me'amal yishbech al pi biv avol shoyvechul legag. You can pour it into the gag onto a roof. Mayim yodim lebiv. Now a chotzer v'achsadra. What if you had a chotzer and an achsadra side by side? Mitzvah from the arba amas. So Pashup Pshat that we're trying to learn here is it's going back to the beginning of the Mishnah. That we said that a chotzer, if it's less than 4 amas, have these restrictions and require an ukah. If there's a chotzer and an achsadra that are joined together, you can add up the square footage of both those areas to make your 4 amma minimum. If you had two-story buildings that were in the same chotzer and there's a porch on the second floor of each building, and the halacha is your chotzer isn't big enough. If your chotzer wasn't big enough, you need a ukah. So what happens if one second-story apartment made a ukah on the ground, but the other second-floor apartment didn't make the ukah? So the halacha is the apartment that made the ukah mutar, they're allowed to splash their water and do sponge on Shabbos and let the water fly down. But the people who didn't do it would be asur, which is somewhat puzzling because at the end of the day, it's still gonna be absorbed in the ukah. What's the difference if I made it or if I didn't make it? And the Gemara is going to discuss this. The other thing we need to know is what's happens that it's on the second floor. what happens if 2 houses on the main floor? What happens if the Shaila is on the second floor? Let's see what the Gemara
What is
says.
this uka floating in the air?
No, an uka is a cesspool on the ground.
Right.
So you're allowed to let your water splash on the ground and into the uka and then go out.
That's why you're asking, why are the guys upstairs?
Yeah, exactly. Why is it relevant that these were upstairs? What if they were downstairs? So the Gemara is going to tell. The Gemara doesn't discuss this. This is discussed in the Mishnah's Teferes Yisrael. He's the only place where I found the reason why he's talking about the upstairs. Because the Gzera here, we're going to see in the Gemara, is that if the Shiloh, I didn't make an Erev, since I wasn't part of the Uka, I didn't make an Erev, and we're afraid that if I dump water on my porch and it's allowed to drain down into the Uka, we're afraid I'll actually carry a bucket straight to the Uka and dump it out. So the Chiddush of the Bryce is not, the Chiddush of the Mishnah is not only if you live on the ground level, you might take a bucket and dump it straight into the Uka. Huadin, if you live on the top floor, which is a stickle pain in the neck to go downstairs, we're still geyser that there could be a problem. That's what the Teferes Yisrael says. Why? It's speaking about a second floor. Zakimar, my time. What is the reason why there's a shear of sasayim? Why does the uka have to be able to contain a sasayim? Zakimar, Amarabba, and Pleisha Adam Osui, Listapik, Sasayim, Mayim, Bechol Yoim. A normal family uses 2 saw of water a day. So therefore, Ba'arba Amois, if I have 4
I
amis,
thought we said that they dispose 2 saw of water a day.
well, if I use it, I dispose of it. When you turn your sink on, it goes, you wash your hands and then the water drains out, right?
Yeah, but not all the water that leaves is the water that consumes.
Basically. Eventually, whatever you use is going to be dumped out. You know, when they charge you for your sewer, it's based on your water bill. There's no meter on your sewer line, right? Because they're assuming a big portion of what of water you use.
Away with it in the country. They don't know what I'm taking.
That's right.
It's a flat rate.
So look, my timer. So if you have 4 square amas, 16 square amas, there's this concept. People don't like dust in their properties. In those days, they didn't have beautiful ceramic floors, right? They had earth floors, and they would get dusty. So a person would want to spray water on his floor to make it wet to keep the dust settled. So that's if it's 4 amas. But pachos midalat amas. But if he has less space than that, shoifchan, that he's gonna spill them out because that's there's too much water to deal with all of the there's too much water that'll overwhelm your property and it'll get to. Rashi's pachos any royal is aleph. The shoifchan, he's gonna dump it out. The chinafki, and therefore, since I don't want it to stay in my property because it's too much water to just settle the dust, mekayme machshavasoi. But really what I want, once I have too much water from my property to absorb, then my intention is that I want it to leave. The Gazer Rabbanan late Gzeir Rabbanan Dilma Asal Mishri Zrika Behedyal Rosh Hashanah. If we allow you to pour water on your floor when you know it's going to run out to Rosh Hashanah, you might actually just dump it straight into the Rosh Hashanah. So Dr. Mar, so therefore, either of it uka, if he created this cesspool, sorry, it will be allowed because then his das is not that it's going right outside; it'll be contained within his little reservoir. But Eloi, but if he didn't make it, then it'll be awesome. That's one shot in our Gemara. That the reason why 4x4, the reason why 4x4 is mutter is because I'm using the water to make the dust settle. Reb Zayar Amar a different svar. Dalar Amos taimi pachs medalar Amos loy taimi. Rashi taimi maya bedalar Amos. So the question is, do I want the water just to settle the dust? Is that the reason why I don't want it to go out of my rishus? Or pshat is, it has nothing to do with what you want. Since this amount of land is able to absorb all that water, so when you're pouring the water out, you're assuming it's going to be absorbed in your property, if you have big enough of a property. My benai, what's the difference if the 4 amas are given to me because that's the amount of land that I would stop the dust from settling with 2 saw, or if it's because I expected to absorb into the ground, or my bai orach v'katan ikbenayu. Do you need to have 4x4, and that has to be the configuration of your 16 square amas, or could it be 2x8? Could it be 2x8? So you just need the area or not? So Rashi says, the dimension of your property is 8x2. You still have 16 square amas. And the fact of the matter is, you have the square footage that could technically absorb society of water. But if you're just using it to make the dust settle, and the reason why they say it's is because such a small area, you don't have guests in normally, so you're not going to care. You only care to settle dust in a nice square area, but in a narrow little area, you can't use that well. Therefore, you're not going to want to use it to bring the dust down, and therefore your intention is going to be that it should pour out into the Rishus Harabim. So at the end of the day, we have a machlokes if it has to be in a square configuration or not. Zok to Gemara, Tanan we learned Chotzer v'Achsadra. That is one of the halachas in our Mishnah. That a chotzer nachsad is mitzaref l'daramis, which almost sounds like a rectangle, because you have the chotzer and then you add on. If the chotzer was a square, let's say, then you add on another area to it. Now it becomes a rectangle. So look at Bishlam or Abzera, where it doesn't matter what its shape is. Nicha el Rabba, where it needs to be a square kasha. So tomorrow, who said it's not a square? Tigmar Abzera aliba de Rabba ba'achsadru malechas al panei kol achotzer kula. Maybe you have a square that's your chutzner, and then your achsadra wraps around the entire chutzner on all four sides. So even with the addition of the achsadra, the space discussed is still a square. Yeah, but it's the type of gazebo that you make it in a configuration that it's instead of a gazebo, it's like a boardwalk around your property. Zaktimar Tashma chutzner she'ein ba dalid amos al dalid amos. So that's pretty clear that it has to be a square. If the chutzner doesn't have dalid amos al dalid amos, ein shoychin l'soicha mayim b'Shabbos. So b'shleim Rabba nicha, because Rabba was the one who said it's al ziluf and it has to be square. El Abzera, who holds that it could be rectangular kasha. Hamani Rabbanani, the author of this brisa, that it has to be square, is going according to the Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon will hold. The Rabbanon are the ones in our Mishnah who held that you cannot pour water directly into the biv. Right? Remember, we had a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanon the Mishnah, and the Rabbanon said you cannot pour the water directly into this little trench that's going to take the water out. And let's see Rashi inside. He held it wasn't enough. Just because the pipe could absorb the water, it didn't matter. So what do you see from there? You see that the Chachamim, if they're asking to pour it directly into a pipe, if it's a matter of absorption, it would be absorbed before it got out. Elamai, he must learn the svar why it's normally mutter up to 4 amas is because you want to keep the dust down. The Gave Biv, Megala Daitoi, the Kashachvich, the Lav Bar Zilfu. When you're pouring it directly into a pipe, you're clearly not trying to do Ziluf. And therefore, you see that what's happening here is Abzer is learning that there's a machlokes tanoim. This shiloh that we have, the reasoning for why Chajr Dalar al Dalar is big enough, it's a machlokes tanoim. The Chachamim, the reasoning is because of Ziluf. And therefore, in the rectangular shaped of property, you wouldn't be able to pour your water even if you had 16 square amas. In a square property, would be, and then the Tanakama, which Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, will hold that it's all about whether or not it could be absorbed into the ground, and therefore the configuration, the shape of the property is not relevant as long as you have the 16 square amas. So Hamani Rabbanani Umasnisin Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the beginning of the Mishnah will be going according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. In fact, why did you want to say that the ratio of the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Why didn't you learn like Rabbah that even the Tanakama holds it has to be square? He was medayik from the lashon of Mishnah Minei Ubei that seems to indicate that the shape doesn't matter. Because my ear, the Tani Chotzer shape chusa. Why did the Tana express the shaila in our Mishnah by saying Chotzer shape chusa midal al? What should have said is Chotzer she'ein ba dalar amos al dalar amos, and that would have been more of an expression to indicate that it has to be square. Shema Mina, from the Reish of Mishnah, he held that its mashma does not have to be square. In fact, Gemara, you still can't say that the Reish of Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. because we learned 4 or 5 lines in the Mishnah, and only first then does the Mishnah introduce Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov does. When we just say Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Reish Alav Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So the Gemara, no, Kula Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He could all be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Chisur Mechsera, and we'll have to sort of amend the Mishnah. V'achiyatani Chatu she'pchusa midal ramis ein shoifchin l'soichem mayim b'Shabbos hadalid. But if it was dalid, you shoifchin. Hadal Ramesh Shoifchin. Share Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Biva Komer Dal Ramesh B'Shus Rabbim Shoifchin L'Soichem Mayim B'Shabbos. Any configuration is fine. Why is any configuration fine? Because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov even allows you to pour it into a pipe as long as there's enough length in the pipe to absorb most of the water.
The whole chain is a ship.
I'm sorry, the sheh. Yeah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Biva Komer. He holds if it's a covered pipe and it's 4 amas, no problem. So it will not be like Hananya. The Tanya Hananya Omer afilu gag meya amo lo yishpoich. So Hananya is even more from than the Chachamim. Our Chachamim say you can pour it onto a gag and it'll go directly into the pipe. Hananya says you can't even pour it onto a roof if it's not a roof that absorbs. The roof is not designed. Roofs aren't designed to absorb moisture, to channel it, to repel the moisture, and therefore it's going to go straight into the pipe, and it's going to be a problem. Tana, we learned this whole halacha in our Mishnah. That says that you have to. You cannot pour water if your culture is less than 4x4. That's only b'moisach chama. That's only in the summer. Where anyways your whole property is all muddy. You can dump as much water as you want on your property. You don't need a cesspool because anyway it's all muddy. My time, Amarava, is Adam Rocha. A person doesn't care anymore where the water goes because his whole property is muddy anyway. Amarle Abaye, how could you say that? That normally a person just wants it to absorb, he doesn't care where it goes. And we learned in a brisa that you're not allowed to spill it out. So how could you describe that? How could you explain that? What exactly are we concerned about these shayfrim? If we're in the winter, if you're worried that he's going to mess up his chutz, it's going to be muddy. In the winter, there's never a reason to be worried about it. The imishum gzeira, and if it's al gzeira that shemi yoimru chinoy roshal plonim mekalech mayim, and if you're concerned that someone walking by sees water rushing out of my drain pipe, so he's going to think that I'm pouring water out, it's not a problem because in the winter, stam chinoyris makalchanim. In the winter, it's normal for all pipes to be running, even when it's not raining. Sometimes, even after the rain stops, your eaves are still dripping and draining water off, right? So therefore, even if it's not raining, it's not unusual in the winter time to see water coming out of those pipes. But in the summer, it's going to be a problem. Omar Rav Nachman said, so Rava said a very important halacha that nowadays, that in the winter, there's no rules at all. No matter what size of property is, you're going to be okay. You can always dump whatever you want in your property. Rav Nachman said a little differently. In the Moishak Shomim, if he had an uka that was able to hold 2 saw, then you let him dump up to sasayim in his chotzer. And Toshu says it's lav dafka. You let him dump unlimited into his chotzer if he has an uka that's machzik sasayim. Machzik saw, if the uka that he put in the wintertime is only machzik saw, then lois saw. You'll give him a saw. So if you create an uka in your property that's machzik sasayim, you can dump an unlimited amount of water on the floor of your property. But if you only made a smaller cesspool, it's only a saw, then we're going to limit the amount that you can pour into your property to a saw. But in the Moshe Chama, machzik sasayim, nois lo sasayim. If you make a properly sized cesspool, you can pour a sasayim. But saw, if you put an undersized cesspool, ein nois lo kol ikar. You're not allowed to let him. You're not allowed to pour anything into your chotzer if you have that. In fact, more, why not? Moshe Chama nami machzik saw, nesav lo saw. If he has a cesspool that can hold the saw, let him dump a saw because it'll be absorbed in the saw. So We don't let him pour anything into the cesspool in the summer because we're afraid he'll pour more than he's able to. In fact, so why do we let him pour more? Why do we let him pour a saw into a saw? But how come we not going to pour too much? Because in the winter we're never worried about pouring too much. If you're worried because he doesn't want to get his property muddy, so he doesn't care that the water should be going outside. His intention is he doesn't care. I'm not worried about that either because some anybody walking by sees water coming out in the winter won't even think about it. So Abaye says here, therefore, as much water as you pour, there's a shaila if Abaye is explaining Rab Nachman and saying that according to Rab Nachman, in the winter, if you have sosayim, you're allowed to pour, if you have a cesspool sosayim, you can pour as much water as you want. That's one shot of the Gemara. Other shot of the Gemara is Abaye saying his own halacha. I guess we could stop here.
But obviously,